Okay, we are live, and I'll share the screen with the verse. But if you want to chant Jai we can go long today, Maharaj, or because it's our fault we're starting late. If you want to go long. Oh, you're muted, Maharaj. Share the screen. So yeah, we are live.
I'll just start.
Okay.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
This morning we will take a look at Srimad Bhagavatam, Chapter 1, Chapter 2, questions by the sages. Today, text 7, although I did find myself tempted to also try to roll in text 8, but then I thought, well, why not text 9? Oh, text 10 is also really juicy. Oh, 11 is amazing.
Maharaj, as much as you want to cover, we are happy to listen.
Well, I don't think I can do any of them any kind of justice if I do that. So I'll let other devotees have fun. I'll let other devotees have fun with those other verses. So text 7. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayatyasuvaidagyam Jnanam cha yadahaitukam. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace. Oh, maybe I should go through the word to word because the words carry a lot of significance in this verse. So word to word, Vasudeva unto Krishna, Bhagavati unto the personality of Godhead, Bhakti Yoga, the contact of devotional service, Prayojita, being applied, Janayati, does produce, Ashu, very soon, Vairagyam, detachment, Jnanam, knowledge, Cha, and yet, that which, Ahitukam, causeless. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Those who consider devotional service to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna to be something like material emotional affairs may argue that in the revealed scriptures, sacrifice, charity, austerity, knowledge, mystic power, and similar other processes of transcendental realization are recommended. According to them, bhakti, or the devotional services for the devotional service of the Lord, is meant for those who cannot perform the high grade activities. Generally, it is said that the bhakti cult is meant for Shudras, Vaishyas, and the less intelligent woman class. But that is not the actual fact. The bhakti cult is the topmost of all transcendental activities, and therefore it is simultaneously sublime and easy. It is sublime for the pure devotees who are serious about getting in contact with the Supreme Lord, and it is easy for the neophytes who are just on the threshold of the house of bhakti. To achieve that interesting phrase, to achieve the contact of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Sri Krishna is a great science, and it is open for all living beings, including the Shudras, Vaishyas, women, and even those lower than the low-born Shudras. So what to speak of high-class men like the qualified Brahmanas and the great self-realized kings? The other high-grade activities designated as sacrifice, charity, austerity, etc., are all corollary factors following the pure and scientific bhakti cult. The principles of knowledge and detachment are two important factors on the path of transcendental realization. The whole spiritual process leads to perfect knowledge of everything material and spiritual, and the results of such perfect knowledge are that one becomes detached from material affection and becomes attached to spiritual activities. Becoming detached from material things does not mean becoming inert altogether, as men with the poor fund of knowledge think. Naishkarmya means not undertaking activities that will produce good or bad effects. Negation does not mean negation of the positive. Negation of the non-essentials does not mean negation of the essential. Similarly, detachment from material forms does not mean nullifying the positive form. The bhakti cult is meant for realization of the positive form. When the positive form is realized, the negative forms are automatically eliminated. Therefore, with the development of the bhakti cult, with the application of positive service to the positive form, one naturally becomes detached from inferior things and he becomes attached to superior things. Similarly, the bhakti cult, being the supermost occupation of the living being, leads him out of material sense enjoyment. That is the sign of a pure devotee. He's not a fool, nor is he engaged in the inferior energies, nor does he have material values. This is not possible by dry reasoning. It actually happens by the grace of the Almighty. In conclusion, one who is a pure devotee has all other good qualities, namely knowledge, detachment, etc. But one who has only knowledge and detachment is not necessarily well acquainted with the principles of the bhakti cult. Bhakti is the supermost occupation of the human being. Om Jnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukhaṁ Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachadine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayat Yashuvairagyam Jnanam Cha Yadhaitukam. By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, one immediately, excuse me, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. So yesterday we saw that Bhakti Yoga is the supreme dharma, the supreme occupational, the supreme duty, the supreme religion for all human beings. Savai pung sung paro dharmo yato bhakti radhokshaje. And that because it doesn't have any cause outside of itself, so it's a haituki. Because of that, it's caused only by bhakti itself. Then it's also apratihata. There isn't anything that can stop it. So we we see from Srila Prabhupada's purport and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary that these verses address the first and perhaps also the second um, of the questions asked by the sages. What's, what's the most beneficial thing for people to do, human beings especially to do, and what is the essential teachings? What is the essential teaching of all the scriptures? So Srimad Bhagavatam doesn't mess around. The very first verse, you know, the Namaskar verse offers obeisances to Vasudeva Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in in the most comprehensive possible way. The second verse tells us um, what it is the Bhagavatam addresses, and um, also for whom. As I mentioned yesterday, those who are satam, those who are dharma praujita kaitava, they've already given up all kinds of um, conventional senses of dharma, as Krishna says at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. End of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, just love me, and here's how you do it practically. Forget all conventional senses of dharma and just take shelter of me exclusively. And then the second verse of the Bhagavatam starts with the next step. For those who've already done that, now we have something to discuss. And what's the result of discussing that? Well, we become absolutely intoxicated with the subject matters of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which are exclusively Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his devotional service, and the devotees who serve him. So this is this is the real business of the living entity, and this will become clearer as we go through these verses. We'll see in verse, well, let me zip forward a little bit, give a little preview. Don't want to steal anyone's thunder. But in tomorrow's verse, which I've always found a very intriguing verse, this section, these verses in this second chapter show us not only is bhakti the ultimate engagement for any human being, but it's absolutely apart. It's categorically different from absolutely everything else. Jnana, yoga, karma, these things have actually no real meaning without bhakti. They have no effect without bhakti. So in tomorrow's verse, we'll see that even if you engage perfectly in varnashram dharma, if it doesn't awaken an attraction for hearing the message of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it's just a waste of time. The only gain you get is the trouble you take. It's just as we see at the beginning of the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter about devotional service. And the next verse says that everything we do should be meant for securing our ultimate liberation. Nothing we do should be done for material gain. And we certainly shouldn't use bhakti to cultivate sense gratification to try to make a better life for ourselves in this world. And further, in the text 10, that our desires, our activities, our energies should never aim for making ourselves comfortable in this material world. We should accept, um, as this verse says, a healthy life, um, because human life is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth, and that nothing else should be the goal of our life. And it goes on and on. And then, a little later in the chapter, we have verses that kind of lay out um, the different stages of bhakti, as we'll see. So, um, we see we see in the first paragraph of Srila Prabhupada's purport that Srila Prabhupada addresses some misunderstandings about bhakti. And that is that bhakti is a kind of lesser path meant for people with lesser qualifications. People outside the higher classes in Varnashram society. So Shudras, Vaishyas, women who generally weren't educated in that culture. There were a lot of exceptions, but kind of the general rule is that most women didn't have much of an education. So Srila Prabhupada says that actually that bhakti is actually the topmost of all transcendental activities, and that it's simultaneously sublime and easy, he says. Sublime for the pure devotees who are serious about getting in contact with the Supreme Lord, and easy for neophytes who are just on the threshold of the house of bhakti. And somehow or other, the on the threshold of the house of bhakti didn't strike me until I read it aloud just now, um, in the way that it should have, because when we talk about the processes of bhakti yoga, the 64 main aspects of bhakti yoga that are presented in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we see that the Srila Rupa Goswami explains that the first 10 are vidhi, or um, uh, instructions, rules, things we ought to do by observing them. The second 10 out of those 64 are nishedha, or prohibitions. Um, and so things that we should observe by not doing. And he points out, um, after he lists those 20 activities, he says, these 20 angas of bhakti, these 20 practices of bhakti constitute the entrance to the temple of bhakti. Prabhupada here says the threshold of the house of bhakti. Same thing. So these are things that we need. These are things that we need to take seriously, because by adopting these things, either by accepting or rejecting them, um, we actually make ourselves more eligible for the other activities of bhakti, um, many of which are even more essential. And we know that there are 5 because they're listed again at the end of the list. So they're emphasized by repetition, and by repetition, especially at the end of the list. As an old writing teacher, I can say that there are a couple of power positions in any piece of text. One is the beginning, and one is the end. So sometimes, we may introduce a new idea at the beginning of a paragraph, and then we bring it home at the end of the paragraph. So that's a power position in the text. And the same thing You might have a concluding chapter if it's a nonfiction book. Might have a concluding chapter that really wraps up all, kind of brings together all the arguments presented in the book, and maybe even an epilogue, kind of looking forward to what life might look like if we were to take these things to heart, or something like that. So those five things are, as we find them in Chaitanya Charitamrita: Sadhu Sangha, Nam Kirtan, Bhagavat Shravan, Maturavas, Srimurtira Shraddhaya Sevan, associating with devotees. And again, when Srila Rupa Goswami mentions that in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he presents three qualifications for the kind of association we should aspire for. One, sajatiyasya. A lot of devotees like to say like-mindedness. I prefer the phrase like-heartedness because I think it's more to the point. In other words, we share each other's goals generally. And our goal is bhakti yoga. Our goal is devotional service to Krishna. The second is affection, that they're snigdhe, are affectionately disposed toward us. If they weren't affectionately disposed toward us, we're probably not going to seek their association too much. I mean, I have my own experience. It's kind of clear to me as a shy person that, I'm not going to be the one to approach someone, especially if they don't seem to show any interest in meeting me or getting to know me. If there does seem to be some interest, I'll try to respond to that as gracefully as I can, which is often not too gracefully because I'm just a little awkward because of that shyness. And shyness has to do with the sense of being judged. So shy people, we keep ourselves reserved because we have this kind of underlying fear that people are going to judge us, and the judgment's not going to be generous. We're afraid of that. So, we want the association of people who are affectionately disposed toward us. And svato vare. Vara means superior, as I pointed out before, just like Vrindavana Natabana, the best dancer in Vrindavan. That's Krishna. And so we want the association of people who are whose realization is superior to us. We want the association of people who are at least a little more advanced than we are. Maybe not too much more advanced because we may not be able to relate to them. May or may not be able to relate to them, although generally they may want to make themselves accessible. So, this like-heartedness, affectionate disposal, and at least somewhat superior advancement. So sadhu sangha, nam kirtan, chanting the holy names, Bhagavat Shravan, what we're doing right now, studying Srimad Bhagavatam, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, hearing about Krishna, any text about Krishna, any authorized text about Krishna. Mathura Vas, spending some time in a holy place like Mathura or Vrindavan or Purushottam Kshetra, Jagannath Puri, or Navadvip Mayapur area. These places are especially sacred to the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And we don't have to live there physically our entire lives. Not everybody can do that. But if we spend some time there, in the Nectar of Devotion, when Srila Prabhupada discusses that, he says a month or a fortnight, a couple of weeks, or even a few days, 5 days or something like that. If we spend even that much time in a holy place. That's an anga of bhakti. If we go there to imbibe the devotion that permeates those places. And Sri Murtira Shraddhaya Sevana, worshiping the deity of the Lord with faith, with devotion, uh, with affection. So these things are particularly powerful. But Srila Rupa Goswami, when he says that these first 20 angas of bhakti are the entrance to the or the threshold to the house of bhakti, as Srila Prabhupada puts it here, um, he says the first three are absolutely essential. And so the first three are taking shelter of a spiritual master, Guru Padashraya, taking shelter of the feet at the feet of a spiritual master, um, accepting instruction and initiation, Diksha Shiksha Adi, from the spiritual master, and Vishrampena Guru Seva, serving the spiritual master with uh, with confidence, with confidence, with ultimately with affection, with intimately. But also there should be an element of reverence in there as well. I think especially at the beginning of the relationship with the spiritual master. So these three things are essential. And Srila Prabhupada makes the point that that bhakti yoga is user-friendly. This is a user-friendly spiritual process. He says it's easy for the neophytes who are just on the threshold of the house of bhakti, just working on those initial things, following in the footsteps of the great acharyas and etc. Um, the other important point that's made in this verse is that it's bhakti that causes spiritual knowledge, jnana, and detachment from the world, vairagya. And Srila Rupa Goswami, sometimes when we're new, and this was certainly the case with me. I have a little embarrassing story to share in that regard. We may think that memorizing a lot of shlokas and and bullet points and quotations from the scriptures and engaging in all kinds of austerities, that these things will awaken bhakti. But that's not the case. Jnana and vairagya are not angas of bhakti. Instead, as Srila Prabhupada points out here, um, they happen as a result of bhakti. When we engage in bhakti, he says, all other good qualities, namely knowledge, detachment, and all the other things, those things follow from the engagement in bhakti yoga. Um, so when I was a brahmachari, I was in my early 20s. I was 22, 22 and a half. Um, when I moved into the temple, and I finally moved into the temple, I was 21 when I met the devotees. Took me a while to get around to moving into the temple for a bunch of reasons. There were things, I was still in the Navy when I met the devotees. So that was a bit of a problem, and I had things going on. So, I was 22 when I moved into the temple. So, when you're that age, our frontal lobe isn't fully formed, our judgment's still not great, and we're full of testosterone, and we're thinking about all kinds of ways to enjoy the world. And of course, for a brahmachari, what we think about most is that we are removing ourselves from sex. I remember thinking at one point, a couple of points during those 3 years that I spent as a brahmachari, life is so good. I don't have to worry about women and I don't have to worry about money. And then when I reflected on that, I thought, God, I hope that's not my only motivation. It's just to kind of like simplify my life by removing myself from these um, complications, these things that complicate our lives. And so at one point, we heard about a letter written, one of our godbrothers wrote to Srila Prabhupada saying that he was struggling with his sexual impulses. So Srila Prabhupada wrote him back and said, eat half as much as you need. If you want to deal with lust, eat half as much as you need and sleep less. Um, so one of my godbrothers and I, one of my friends and I, we heard that and we looked at each other as if we'd found this uh, magic code for unlocking pure devotional service. If we cut our eating in half and only sleep, a couple hours a night, we'll become very advanced. So we started doing that. And after a while, um, and I know this wasn't just me because we ended up sharing these reflections on what happened to us. We started thinking we were better than the other devotees. We were becoming advanced. We were like on the fast track to spiritual advancement. And the fact of the matter was because we weren't eating enough, and we were young and very active. We'd go out on the streets chanting anywhere between 6 and 10 hours a day, plus the kirtans at the temple, plus a couple of hours of japa every day, and other practical service around the temple. So we were young and very active. So the result was that one, we became very constipated, and two, we were starting to go a little nuts uh, for lack of sleep and lack of nourishment. And once that became clear to not only to everyone else in the temple, no doubt, but once it became clear even to us, then we dropped that program on a dime. So the fact is, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points this out in his commentary, is that um, he says, um, well, let me see what he says. He says, what form does that satisfaction of the mind, which is mentioned in verse 6, take? The satisfaction of the mind is filled with knowledge and experience of the form, qualities, and sweetness of the Lord, which cause complete disgust with all inferior objects. So once we actually have some direct experience of the Lord, um, then that supplants anything else that we might have thought desirable. So he says that's explained in this verse, that this bhakti is endowed, yojita, in an excellent matter, which means very much, like in praujhita, dharma projhita kaitava in the second verse, um, in a very excellent manner with dasya, sakya, and other loving emotions. Another meaning of bhakti yoga prayojita is bhakti yoga has been made the only goal, the prayojana. And then he says, separate endeavor for attaining knowledge and detachment are not necessary in the practice of bhakti, for bhakti itself produces them very quickly. At the time of performing bhakti, they are attained. And here he cites a verse from the second chapter of the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam. So this is one of the Navayogendras. I'm trying to remember, maybe Prabuddha, explaining bhakti, answering one of King Nimi's questions about bhakti yoga. And so the verse is, Bhakti pareshano bhavo viraktir anyatra chaishatrika ekakalaha prapadyamanasa yatashnasyus tushti pushti kshudapaya nughasam. Um, Three things happen simultaneously and progressively when we engage in bhakti yoga, just as when we eat a meal. He's making a comparison here, and he's drawing direct parallels between these three different um, results of these two activities. Three things happen simultaneously and progressively as we engage in bhakti yoga, just as three things happen simultaneously and progressively when we eat a meal. So when we eat a meal, he says three things, the sage says, three things happen, and they all happen simultaneously, and they grow progressively. Tushti, pushti, and kshudapaya. So tushti means pleasure. So when we eat a meal, when we eat, especially if it's cooked well and offered to the Lord, then there's great pleasure. Pushti, nourishment, and kshudapaya, um, uh, the slaking of our hunger, diminishment of the of hunger. So, and in his commentary on this verse in the Bhagavatam, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out that this begins from the very first morsel of rice. That there's some tushti, there's some pushti, there's some pleasure, there's some nourishment, and there's some relief from hunger. In a similar way, when we engage in bhakti yoga, three things happen simultaneously and progressively as we engage in bhakti yoga. So the first is bhakti, this sense of devotion, and that's inherent in the activity itself, at least to the extent that we invest our heart in that activity rather than just doing it mechanically or doing it in order to get some other goal, attain some other goal, or as a means for, as a part of the means for attaining another goal. Pareshano bhava, some direct experience of the Lord. And it doesn't have to mean some big flashy sporty. All of a sudden the clouds parted, and there I'm looking at the face of God. Um, or even something like as dramatic as Moses' burning bush on Mount Sinai. Doesn't have to be something. Some direct experience of the Lord can be appreciation of a nice kirtan, appreciation of a nice point made in a discussion about the science of bhakti yoga or about Krishna's Leela. And then the third thing that happens is um, uh, um, uh, vairagya, detachment from other things. And this is natural in the same way that relief from hunger happens as we eat, um, then relief from attraction to other things, everything else. That also diminishes as we engage in bhakti. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points this out very clearly in his commentary on that verse, that if we, he says, just as if we eat a little food, we get a little pleasure, we get a little nourishment, and we get a little relief from hunger. And as if we eat a lot of food, then we get more pleasure, we get more nourishment, and we get greater relief from hunger. So in a similar way, he says, if we engage a little bit in bhakti, we get a little bhakti, we get a little love, we get a little experience of the Lord, and we get a little detachment from other things. But if we engage fully in bhakti, then we uh, become full of bhakti. We have complete experience of the Lord, and we become completely detached from other things. So we don't need now about jnana and vairagya. Srila Rupa Goswami says that trying to become a little detached and trying to cultivate knowledge, especially um, uh, knowledge about bhakti, that can be a little helpful at the beginning. So they're not completely discounted. It's not something that we want to necessarily flush down the toilet. But these will be we will see these arise as symptoms um, in our character and in the character of others as we engage in bhakti yoga. So because of that, bhakti is, as Srila Prabhupada points out at the end of his purport, the supermost dharma, the supermost occupation for all human beings. And also, um, early in the second chapter of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami points out that bhakti is not just for low-class people. He says, but every human being is eligible for bhakti, just as every human being is eligible for taking a bath in the Ganges in the dead of winter during the month of Magh, January and February. So bhakti is for everybody, and it's especially for those um, who starts out by pointing out that everybody is eligible for bhakti. Then he talks about different degrees of eligibility for bhakti, the symptoms of different degrees of eligibility for bhakti. So bhakti is for everybody. And our business as students, practitioners, and teachers of bhakti yoga is to help other people see how it's both relevant to their lives and accessible to them. Okay, top of the hour. Any quick comments, questions, discussion?
Jonathan has something.
Hare Krishna Ashram, Swami Maharaj.
Krishna?
Thank you for the class. My question was, so every step we take is either spiritual or material. Srila Prabhupada mentioned this a little, that it's positive or negative. So how can we make sure that every step we take is spiritual?
Well, we're going to do our best because ultimately that's all we have, right? So there will be missteps, but we can minimize that, and even better than that, use what we learn from those missteps when we engage in the association of other devotees who are a little further along on the path. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells us that there are certain elements in approaching a spiritual master. Tadviti pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshanah. He says that we should approach people who are experienced in bhakti yoga with these three attitudes. So pranipat, submission. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean, I don't know, groveling or making ourselves doormats, opening ourselves to abuse or anything like that. What it really means, essentially, as far as I can see, is an open heart, that we're um, at least willing to consider the things that they have to say. And that, so pranipat, submission, open-heartedness, open-mindedness, pariprashna, questions relevant, to our endeavor to progress in bhakti, and sevaya, a sense of service. So in other verses, we're meant to serve the guru by bringing wood for the sacrificial fire. In samurai culture, it was like, I don't know, chop wood, carry water, stuff like that. Before you could learn the art of fighting with the sword, etc. First of all, you had to actually cultivate your relationship with your teacher. And we do that by service. And there's an aphorism by Chanakya Pandit, whom Srila Prabhupada often quotes in other contexts. One of his verses says that just as we get water from a well by digging, we get knowledge from the teacher by service. So if we maintain association with other devotees with these attitudes, with an open mind, then we can learn from the missteps we make and progressively decrease the missteps that we do make. But we'll see, even as we read this here in Srimad Bhagavatam, if you want success in karma, you have to do everything perfectly. You have to do the sacrifices perfectly. The mantras have to be chanted perfectly. All the stuff has to be set up right. You've got to have the right alignment of the stars and all that jazz. Otherwise, you're not going to get, and there has to be some admixture of bhakti, devotion. Otherwise, you're not going to get the results. It may even backfire on you, blow up in your face. Same thing with yoga, and the same thing with jnana for cultivating an impersonal realization. These things have to be done perfectly to get the results with a mixture, a little bit, at least a tinge of bhakti. Bhakti doesn't have to be done perfectly. We just have to try sincerely. And the Bhagavatam tells us that. We'll see that in the beginning in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavatam. And so because just as we see in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that in contrast to every other kind of endeavor, when we engage in bhakti yoga, whatever progress we make is never lost. If we don't complete, if we don't complete our course in this lifetime, we don't have to go back and start at zero. We pick up in a subsequent lifetime, we pick up where we left off in our practice. Sometimes there's a little catching up time. It seems like there's a little catching up time. But we see that for some people, that catching up time is very brief. It becomes clear to many of us very early on, oh, this is not this devotee's first kirtan. He or she's been here before. So we will make those steps early on. And Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, who I like to celebrate as being a real zealot for bhakti, wrote a book explaining how the 9 different stages of bhakti that Rupa Goswami presents in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, how they work and how they look. And the early stages, the path is, as I mentioned yesterday, I think, it's narrow, uneven, twisty, and steep. But as we progress on the path, it broadens, smooths out, becomes more level, and becomes easier. So once we get to the stage of nishta, and then nishta means steadiness in our practice, without making a lot of those missteps. And the missteps noticeably decrease. Even we can notice that ourselves. Then it becomes a little bit easier. Is that okay?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you, Maharaj.
The key to everything is association with devotees and keeping our hearts inquisitive and open. Our minds inquisitive, and our minds and hearts open.
Okay.
User-friendly. Anything else before we let everyone go?
The comment.
Okay.
I was referred this verse the other day when I was talking to someone in a class, and I let them know that I was speaking with someone who's more potentially more on like an impersonal route, and I found it important that I was reminded that there were so many different kinds of transcendentalists that were at the initial recitation of Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's really interesting that bhakti is really for everybody, and potentially I was like really hesitant to like talk about directly bhakti with this individual because of where they were at, seemingly not wanting to offend them or have them make some sort of offense. And more of a comment, but I'm wondering if you could speak on that a little bit in terms of we'll meet so many people out there who are on different paths, and of course bhakti is for everybody. And I'm trying to have a sense of how to introduce in a way that's approachable, and also with a really open heart, understanding where they're at as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's an important question, because when people find out that we're engaged in bhakti, they're going to ask questions. And so it's really good for us, before we start talking a lot, to listen.
Mm,
So, if we ask questions, draw them out, find out a little bit more about where they're at. That makes it easier for us to meet them there, to meet them where they are. And, I think this is maybe among the impetuses for the Krishna West movement in ISKCON, which some people are presenting as an innovation. Frankly, we were doing Krishna West in Hawaii in 1970. Not the ISKCON devotees so much, but Siddha Swarupananda's Krishna Yoga community was the original Krishna West. His idea, Siddha Swarupananda's idea was present Lord Chaitanya's teachings, Srila Prabhupada's teachings, but don't, make everybody start putting on orange polyester sheets and buzzing their head
mm,
right off the bat. So they dressed like ordinary people. Now, because it was 1969, 1970, and most of the people who were participating were younger, most of them dressed a lot like hippies and surfers, because it was Hawaii and that's where they were coming from. So it's good if we listen first, try to get a sense of where people are at. I mean, when I give a Sunday feast talk, I don't always remember to do this, but I try to remember to just to get a sense of who's new, who's never been to a Hare Krishna temple before, who's never been to this temple before. Welcome them, make them feel comfortable, but also, um, if it's not just people who are already practicing to some degree or another, then I'm going to adjust my presentation.
mm,
I'm going to say maybe some different things, some things I might not have said otherwise, not say some things I might otherwise have said. And quite often just say some of those things, some of the things that I would say in any event, maybe say them a little differently. Um, you know, just to try to let them see the relevance of bhakti yoga in their lives, and to try to make it more accessible to them. Show them how this is for them too. So yeah, I appreciate that. That's an intelligent, I think that's an intelligent approach. Srila Prabhupada, when he was preaching, sometimes we see when he was preaching, say, to Catholic religious, sometimes he was very broad and accommodating, as in those conversations in Germany or Australia. But when he was speaking with that French cardinal, was he? French priest or cardinal?
Yeah, Cardinal Richelieu or something like
Yeah,
that.
Cardinal Richelieu.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was intense. He was heavy, because you could sense the cardinal didn't have, he didn't have that, um, uh, uh, he didn't have that submission. He didn't have any humility. So
mm,
Prabhupada just kind of called him out and says, well, you're acting like you're a big religious authority. Um, so let's start by acting like a civilized human being, and stop killing animals in slaughterhouses.
mm,
And the cardinal's response to that was, was resistance. So Srila Prabhupada just kind of like pressed him, and he just like wanted to, I guess he was trying to make an impression on us that, you don't have to pussyfoot with everybody.
mm.
All right.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
Thank you
thank
for
you
the
all.
discussion. Just end the
This,
live.
this was a treat.
Absolutely.
See you all again soon.
Jai. Hey, Jason, can you stay?
Yeah, yeah. I also
Just
wanted to
for...
say, really quickly, while we have Guru Dave here, happy appearance day. I hope you have a really amazing day today.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Maharaj, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Oh no. You know, it's so funny, Maharaj, because I booked you a flight once. Every time I book a flight now on Alaska Airlines, it asks if I want to be William D or William R. Because we have the same legal name. And I think it just thought that, I don't know, it just assumes, sometimes it preloads, so I actually see your birthday a lot because it's in my, my airline, my profile thing. But I somehow, oh my gosh. Anyway, happy birthday, Maharaj.
Thank you. I'm